Hey guys, I hope y'all are having a great Monday. So we are going to move on to lesson 8.2. So this is actually the first lesson in chapter 8 that we're going to cover. We're skipping 8.1. So 8.2 covers Pythagorean theorem. This is not the first time you've heard of this. You've heard of this before you actually get to geometry. So Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So when you have a right triangle, only when you have a right triangle, you can use this theorem to find missing sides of triangles. So you have three sides, A, B, and C. And if you have two, then you can use this theorem to find the third side. The only catch is C always has to be the longest side. This is called your hypotenuse. Here's how you find your hypotenuse every time. Find your 90-degree angle. Wherever your 90-degree angle is, if you draw an arrow, the side across from it, that's your hypotenuse every time. Because 90 degrees is your largest angle, so it's across from your largest side. Your largest side is across from your largest angle. So your hypotenuse is always across from your longest side. Okay, so let's do a couple of examples. First of all, let's always start off finding our hypotenuse. So I find my 90-degree angle. Here's the 90-degree angle. Draw an arrow. There's the hypotenuse. Here's my hypotenuse. So it has to go where C is. So the other two are going to be either A or B. It does not matter which one. Does not matter at all. So let's call A 4 and let's call B 7. So when we're plugging it in, we'll have 4 squared plus 7 squared equals x squared. Okay, now you can either know these off the top of your head or you can use your calculator. 4 squared is 16 and 7 squared is 49 equals x squared. So now we have to combine our like terms. So add 16 and add 49. So you get 65 equals x squared. However, now we have to solve for x. So the only way to cancel out this squared is to take the square root of both sides. When you take the square root of both sides, a square root cancels out a square. So now, because you have a square root in a square, your x will be by itself. And we'll have the square root of 65. Here's the deal though. I want you to leave this as a simplified radical, not a decimal. For example, if you plug this into the square root of 65, I don't want your answer to be 8.1. I want you to simplify this. So let's see if we can get anything to go into 65. So 65 divided by 5. Well, 5 and 13, but 13 doesn't break down to anything. 25 doesn't go into 65. So I bet 65 is as simplified as it gets. So that's going to be my final answer. Okay. Okay, so let's do number 2. Find your hypotenuse. Here's your 90-degree angle. Draw your arrow. So here's 12. So this is your hypotenuse, which means this is C. So now your x isn't going on the end. X is going to go in either A or B. Your 12 is going on the end. So it'll look something similar to this. 8 squared plus x squared equals 12 squared. Now remember, 8 and x, those can be interchangeable. It doesn't matter which order you put these in. Okay, 8 squared and 12 squared. Well, 8 squared is 64. 12 squared is 144. So now we need to get 64 to the other side. Well, right now 64 is positive. So to get 64 to the other side, you have to subtract. So you have 144 minus 64 is 80. So you'll get x squared equals 80. Now, take the square root. We have to get x by itself. And in order to get x by itself, you have to take the square root of both sides. 80 will simplify. Remember doing this from math workshops? When we simplified all of our radicals, 80 breaks down to, let's see what we could use. I'm going to use 16 and 5. I like 16 because 16 breaks down to 4 and 4. Remember, if 16 breaks down to 4 and 4, then we can circle 4 and 4. And if we can circle 4 and 4, then they come outside of the house. So x is going to be equal to 4 square root of 5's left at home because he didn't have a partner. So x equals 4 square root of 5, and that's your final answer. There's a reason we're leaving the square roots in, and you'll see in the next lesson. So square root of 80 simplifies to 4 square root of 5. Okay, I want you to take a few minutes now, and I want you to try numbers 3 and 4. Okay, so find your hypotenuse, and then I want you to solve for x. Try it. All right, so check your answers. I got for number 3, x is equal to the square root of 89. That did not reduce. And then for number 4, I got 6 square root of 3. So let me quickly explain. X is your hypotenuse, so you have 8 squared plus 5 squared equals x squared, 64 and 25. Add those together, can't simplify. Over here, 12 is your hypotenuse, so you get 6 squared, 12 squared, 144. Subtract your 36. Take the square root of 108. Well, 108 simplifies to 36 and 3. 36 reduces to 6 and 6. You can circle your 6, therefore 6 comes outside and 3 stays at home. Okay? So, that is Pythagorean theorem. Now, the converse of Pythagorean theorem also holds true. So, if it's a right triangle, then this works. However, it's opposite. If a squared plus b squared equals c squared, then it's a right triangle. So we can use Pythagorean theorem to determine if 3 sides make a right triangle, an acute triangle, or an obtuse triangle. So what we have to do here is there's 3 sides in each one of these. And we have to determine if they make an acute, obtuse, or right triangle. So that's what our goal is, Is it acute, obtuse, or a right triangle? If a squared plus b squared equals c squared, then it's a right triangle. If a squared plus b squared is greater than c squared, it's acute. But if c squared is the biggest one, then it's obtuse. And I always remember this because if c is the biggest side, and if c squared is greater than both of those, then it has to be obtuse. So I always try to just think of c squared being the greater. If c squared is greater than both of those, then it's obtuse. If it's opposite, if a squared plus b squared is greater than c squared, then it takes 2 and it has to be acute. Because it would take 2 angles to be greater than 1. Okay, so before we get to that part, there's one thing you have to do. Back in chapter 5, we learned what it takes to make the sides of 3 triangles. We learned that in order for 3 sides to make a triangle, the two smallest sides have to be greater than the third. They have to add to be greater than the third. So there's actually 2 steps to these. First, you have to determine, are the 2 smallest sides greater than the third? If so, then you can move on. So it says determine whether each set of the measures can be the measures of the triangle. Can they actually make a triangle? That's step 1. So step 1, can they actually make a triangle? Step 2, classify them. So here's how it would work. Step 1, can they make a triangle? Well, what are the 2 smallest sides? 30 and 40. Well, what's 30 plus 40? 3 plus 4 is 70, so 70 is greater than 50. Well, since 70 is greater than 50, that makes a triangle. Okay, so since that makes a triangle, we can move on. So now let's do 30 squared plus 40 squared, and let's see what this symbol is going to be compared to 50 squared. So I actually put the first 2 in my calculator at one time, and you can do this as well. I do 30 squared plus 40 squared at the same time. So I get that that's 2,500. So 2,500, and then I'm going to plug in 50 squared, and that's also 2,500. Well, those 2 are the same thing, so that means that this is a right triangle, because a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. Okay, going on to number 6. Step 1, do they make a triangle? Is 20 plus 30 greater than 40? Well, 20 plus 30 is 50. Is 50 greater than 40? Yes. Okay, we can move on. Well, what is 20 squared plus 30 squared when we compare it to 40 squared? So I'm going to plug it in my calculator. 20 squared plus 30 squared. And then I'm going to go ahead and type in 40 squared as well. Okay, so I see that these 2 give me 1,300, but 40 squared is 1,600. So that means that this gets the less than symbol. 1,300 is less than 1,600. Well, less than symbol goes with this one. The C is greater, so that means this is obtuse. That these 3 make an obtuse triangle. That's supposed to be 1,300, not 300. Right? All right, number 7. Step 1, do they make a triangle? Is 18 plus 24 greater than 30? 18 plus 24 is 42, so yes. Okay, so move on to step 2. What is 18 squared plus 24 squared when we compare it to 30 squared? Plug it in your calculator. 18 squared plus 24 squared, and then 30 squared. So this one's 900, and this one's also 900. So they are equal, which means it's a right triangle. Now, number 8, first of all, we have to determine if these make a triangle. Well, is the square root of 5 plus the square root of 12, is that greater than the square root of 13? I have no idea. Let's plug it in. Square root of 5 plus square root of 12. Okay, that's 5.7. Is it greater than the square root of 13? Yes. Okay, you see how square root of 5 plus the square root of 12 is 5.7, and the square root of 13 is 3.6. So, yes, now we can move on. But don't let this trick you. What is the square root of 5 squared? Well, remember, when a square root and a square are both there, what happens is that the square root and the square cancel each other out. So when we square all of these, what's really happening is we're just canceling out the square root. So the square root of 5 squared is just 5. The square root of 12 squared is just 12. And the square root of 13 squared is just 13. So what is the square root of 5 squared plus the square root of 12 squared? Those make 17. Well, 17 is greater than 13. So the answer for this one is acute. Okay? All right, you take a couple of minutes, and I want you to try 9 and 10. 9 and 10. Well, in number 9, step 1, what did we determine? Is 6 plus 12 greater than 18? No, 18 is not greater than 18. They are the same. So these 3 sides don't make a triangle. Therefore, it's not obtuse, right, or acute. So we actually stopped at step 1 here. Okay, number 10. Is 2 plus the square root of 8 greater than the square root of 12? When you plug that in your calculator, you will see that 2 plus the square root of 8 is 4.8, and the square root of 12 is 3.4. So, yes, we can move on. So then 2 squared is 4. The square root of 8 squared is just 8, and the square root of 12 squared is just 12. So 4 plus 8 is 12. And that equals 12, so this made a right triangle. Alright guys, that is the rest of 8.2. So, I want you to flip to the back, and there are 17 questions. The first 10 are Pythagorean theorem. Don't let this confuse you. Actually, just go ahead and cross this out, and I want you to use Pythagorean theorem. Don't let the triple part confuse you. I want you to use Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so 1 through 10 are Pythagorean theorem, 11 through 16 are what we just did, and 17 is again Pythagorean theorem. Don't let the word problem scare you. One hint on 3 and 6. Go ahead and just divide this base in half. So if the whole thing's 18, then this half is 9, and this half is 9. And same thing for 6. If the whole thing's 42, just divide it in half to find these, because you'll need that to find the x to use Pythagorean theorem. All right, please be on your best behavior and complete all of this. Finish it in its entirety. I will check it first thing tomorrow when you walk in, and I will see you tomorrow.